Yeah, so this research was really motivated by the idea that multinationals, as we know, it's a fact, use lots and lots of teams, right, to get their work done. But multinational teams struggle to really succeed. And we know that is a big problem in lots of organizations. So one of the big things they really struggle with is you've got people all around the world. People don't share their information, their knowledge enough with each other as much as they could, right? So we're trying to figure out why is that and what are some of the problems that these teams face and how can they be overcome. So the particular focus of this study is on the fact that these teams are so diverse, right? So when you've got a multinational team, it has people, we talk about 4 different kinds of diversity. We've got people from different geographic locations, all different countries around the world. We've got people of different nationalities. We've got people who work in different parts of their organizations, right? Different parts of the organizational structure. We call them structural differences. So people who work in different divisions or business units or functional areas. And people are demographically diverse. Some people are older than others. Some people have been in the organization longer than others. So lots of different kinds of differences. So the question that we focus on in this particular research is, which of these differences actually matter for sharing knowledge in these teams, and moreover, which of them matter most? So that's the real focus of the study. That's the research question. And to address it, what we did is we collected survey data, original survey data from more than 2,000 members of around 289 teams, so almost 290 teams in one very, very large multinational. It's a very well-known multinational organization, more than 100,000 employees around the world. And we collected data on all the differences between the members of these teams, and we did a lot of research to understand which differences matter most, and also how might they be overcome. And in particular, we looked at whether the people knew each other and had worked together before as one of the things that might help them to overcome those kinds of differences. So again, the real question is which differences matter most. So we're looking at these 4 kinds of differences: geographic, nationality-based, structural differences, working in different parts of the organizational structure, and demographic differences. And what we found was that 2 of these kinds of differences mattered much more than the other 2. And in particular, geographic differences really mattered, so working in different countries, and structural differences mattered, so working in different parts of the organizational structure. And when I say they mattered, it means they created barriers to knowledge seeking within this team for people going and asking each other for help or for information related to their work. Nationality differences and demographic differences also mattered. They also created barriers between the team members, but not so big. So the ones that were really big were the geographic differences and the structural differences, and they created the greatest barriers. But the good news was that if you'd worked together before in a team, so we're looking at sort of the dyads, the pairs of people within the team, if you'd worked together before, you could get over to some extent those geographic and structural barriers. So those were the key findings. I think probably the most striking finding, and it kind of emerged really early on as we were looking at the data here, was the importance of structural differences, organizational structure. So when you think about multinational teams, there's a lot of attention on the fact that people work in different parts of the world and that they're different nationalities. But we know that this is true. We just don't think about it in multinational teams so much. These people are also coming from different parts of the organization usually. And we found this was a really strong, to some extent the strongest barrier. So the fact that people worked in different divisions in the organization or different functional areas or different business units. Again, it was a huge, complex organization. Those were really problematic for those kinds of differences were really problematic for the members of those teams. And I think that was the most surprising to us, given that the focus is usually on the nationality and the geographic stuff. I think part of it is recognizing the real variety of differences that there are, right? And I think, we tend to focus a lot on specific ones. Like we know that the fact that we're in different time zones is really a big problem, right? And that's part of different geographic locations. We know that the fact that people speak different languages is a big deal, right? And so managers tend to focus on some of these most obvious things that are really salient when you're internationally dispersed. But the structural stuff, for example, which we found to be surprisingly important, we don't think about as much in a global team. So I think for managers it's being really aware that there's a very wide variety of differences that you need to pay attention to and monitor if you really want people to be sharing knowledge as much as they could be inside the teams. Again, on the plus side for managers though, if you've got people who've worked together before, that can help, right? So when managers are composing their teams, it suggests that really paying attention to that. We know there's lots of good things about people having worked together in the past, but often we don't put people who've worked together in the past because we're trying to get the best team for that particular project. We tend to downplay that criterion. But I think managers could benefit a lot. The research suggests that they could benefit a lot from really paying attention to trying to get people who know each other a little bit already. I think Probably the most important one, and there is one in particular, I think, is that nationality is not so important in our findings. At least, then again, it's not that nationality differences don't matter, and so nationality being where you were born, where you come from, as well as your native language, right? And they do create those kinds of differences. We come from different countries originally. That creates a barrier to knowledge seeking between us. But what we find is it's a much less important barrier than the fact that we may be in different countries. So if we're in the same country and we're different nationalities, it's actually not a very big deal. If we're in different countries, even if we're the same nationality, that's a big deal. So, there's a lot of attention, again, on multinational teams. We tend to focus a lot on these kind of cross-cultural differences and nationality-based differences. In fact, our research suggests if you compare them to other kinds of differences, they matter, but not as much as some of this other stuff in terms of geography or organizational structure seems to matter more. So most of the research in this area is a lot of research on teams. There's some research, not as much, obviously, on multinational teams. Most of the research tends to focus on one or two kinds of differences, right? So most of that research will say nationality differences matter. Look, we find it matters. Or geographic differences, a lot of research on geographically dispersed teams, right? That matters. But I'm not aware of any studies, really, that have pulled together as many different kinds of differences and said, well, if you look at them all together, we agree they all matter. We find they all do matter and actually create barriers within teams. But look, some of them matter quite a bit more than others when you're able to compare them side by side. So I think that's one of the things that's probably most distinctive in terms of what our study has been able to do. The other aspect of it is that we have a large sample of teams that we're able to compare, so around 290 teams, 200,000 team members, and we're looking at all the individual, the pairs within those teams. So that's a much larger and richer data set with lots of different differences going on in there than the prior research has often tackled. So my co-author Jonathan Cummings and I both do a lot of research related to teams in large, complex organizations like large multinationals and collaboration more generally across these kinds of organizations. So one of the things that I'm most interested in is what are the conditions that enable teams to be more effective, right? And in this case, particularly multinational teams. So certainly thinking about teams do have these kinds of differences. Usually we can't make those go away, right? So what are the conditions that can help those teams to be more successful? And not just in terms of being able to share knowledge effectively, but also, what makes them more innovative, what makes them, more efficient or more able to implement their projects or their programs successfully. So that's where the main focus is of this work going forward.